Margaret Hale had lived her whole life believing she was a burden. From the time she was old enough to understand her father's words, she heard the same comments again and again. She was plain, unimpressive, or not like other girls. Her father, Thomas Hale, never said anything kindly about her. He was a rancher who struggled every season, blaming storms, drought, cattle illness, or bad luck, but somehow he always managed to include Margaret in his list of problems. If she cooked, he said the food lacked flavor. If she worked outside, he said she scared the cows. If she stayed inside, he called her lazy. No matter what she did, she could not win. The small frontier town where she lived was rough and dusty, with people always watching one another. Many families were busy surviving, but gossip still traveled fast. Margaret kept her head down, doing chores from morning to night, hoping to avoid attention. She wasn't loud, she wasn't proud, and she wasn't someone who tried to shine. She simply did what she could to make the days pass quietly. Her soft brown hair, simple dresses, and shy smile made her invisible to most people, except when someone needed a target for jokes. A few boys in town teased her, calling her the quiet bird, pretending she was so plain that even shadows forgot to stand behind her. She never replied. She was used to being overlooked. Her father's ranch was failing again that year. Cattle prices were low, the fences needed fixing, and Thomas believed that everything unfair in life happened to him. When traders arrived from the south one afternoon, everyone in town came to see what goods they brought. These traders often traveled near Apache lands and exchanged items for horses, pelts, or supplies. People respected them for their bravery, but also feared the stories they told. Margaret was in town that day, carrying a small basket of vegetables to trade for flour. She kept her eyes on the ground while the men around her admired the horses the traders brought. The air was filled with excitement because horses were valuable, especially healthy ones. Strong horses meant easier work on the ranch, faster travel, and more respect among ranchers. Margaret didn't know that her father had already spoken to the traders before she arrived. She didn't hear the conversation where Thomas complained loudly about having another useless mouth to feed. She didn't hear him say that Margaret was a girl with no future, no beauty, and no chance of marriage. She didn't hear the traders ask what he planned to do. And she definitely didn't hear her father say something that would change her life forever, that he was willing to give them Margaret if they offered him something useful in return. The traders were surprised, even uncomfortable, but Thomas insisted. He said he couldn't afford to keep her any longer and that she would be better off doing small work among the Apache than rotting in a town that didn't want her. He acted as if he was doing her a favor. The traders didn't agree with his thinking, yet they could see he was determined. After a long discussion, the traders finally agreed to take her, not because they wanted to, but because they thought they could bring her to the Apache camp where she might actually be treated better than she was here. Margaret didn't know any of this when she walked toward her father carrying the basket. She only noticed that Thomas had a strange look on his face, a mix of decision and coldness, something she had seen before whenever he blamed her for something. He didn't even look at the vegetables she brought. Instead, he told her to put the basket down and follow the traders. His voice was firm and sharp, the tone he used when he had made up his mind. Confused, she asked him what was happening. Thomas didn't explain. He waved his hand dismissively and said she was leaving with the traders because they had a place for her. Margaret felt a sinking feeling in her chest. She tried to ask again, but her father snapped at her. The traders watched the scene quietly, feeling uneasy. Some people from the town gathered nearby, whispering among themselves. Margaret realized something was wrong when Thomas walked away without looking back, leaving her standing alone with men she didn't know. A cold wind brushed past her, carrying dust and the low murmur of voices behind her. She looked at the traders, her eyes wide with fear. They weren't cruel men, but they were strangers, and she had never gone far from home before. One of the traders spoke gently, telling her they were taking her to a safe place. He avoided telling her the details because he didn't want to make the situation worse. Margaret didn't resist physically. She had been raised to obey without argument. But inside, she felt a storm she couldn't control: fear, confusion, betrayal, and a strange numbness. She asked the traders if she could go home and talk to her father again, but they shook their heads, saying it was too late. Thomas had already taken 2 horses in exchange for her. She didn't even know he had traded her away like an object. People in town watched quietly. A few women looked uncomfortable. One old man muttered that Thomas had gone too far this time, but no one stepped in. Margaret felt her heart break a little more with every step she took away from the life she had known, even if that life had been painful. The traders placed her in their wagon with a blanket and some water. They tried to show kindness because they could see she was frightened. They told her repeatedly that she would not be harmed. Still, the journey began with her holding the edge of the wagon tightly, her eyes filled with silent tears. She didn't cry loudly. Margaret had never been the kind of person who cried for attention. She only let the tears fall slowly, as if her heart was releasing years of quiet suffering. The plains stretched wide around them. The skies were endless, painted with orange and red during sunset. As the wagon rolled on, Margaret kept thinking of her father's face, wondering what she had done to deserve being sent away. She remembered every moment she had tried to please him, every meal cooked, every bucket of water carried, every wound tended after his ranching accidents. None of it had mattered. He had never seen her, not truly. The traders spoke gently among themselves. They said they would bring her to an Apache camp where people respected hard work and kindness. They believed she had those qualities. They had seen the way she carried herself, quiet but strong. They didn't know much about her, but they knew she didn't deserve what had happened. Margaret's fear grew as they approached Apache territory. She had heard countless stories from townspeople, many exaggerated or twisted, describing the Apache as dangerous or unpredictable. But she also knew townspeople loved storytelling more than truth. Still, being taken somewhere new scared her deeply. When they finally reached the edge of the Apache camp, Margaret felt her breath tremble. She held the blanket closer around her shoulders. The camp was peaceful in the evening light. Smoke rose from several fires, and children could be heard laughing somewhere in the distance. It wasn't the harsh place she imagined from the stories told back in town. The traders spoke with Apache elders, explaining everything. The elders listened, their expressions serious and thoughtful. They looked at Margaret, not with disgust or judgment, but with curiosity and concern. They were shocked when they learned that her father traded her simply because he considered her useless. Margaret stood quietly, expecting someone to shout at her or demand something from her. Instead, an Apache woman stepped forward, placed a warm shawl over Margaret's shoulders, and guided her toward one of the shelters. Margaret didn't understand the language, but she understood the kindness. Her heart, wounded and tired, didn't know how to react. That night, for the first time in her life, Margaret cried herself to sleep not because of anger or fear, but because someone, a stranger, had covered her with warmth instead of cold words. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew one thing clearly. Whatever this new life was, it had already begun with more kindness than she had ever known at home. Margaret woke up the next morning to the soft sounds of movement outside the shelter she had slept in. She opened her eyes slowly, expecting confusion or fear to wash over her again, but instead she found a sense of quiet she hadn't felt in years. The blanket around her was warm, and the simple mat beneath her was far more comfortable than the cold wooden floor she had slept on back at her father's ranch. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memories came back. The traders, her father's harsh words, the long road, the new camp. She sat up gently, feeling her heart beat a little faster as she prepared herself for the unknown. When she stepped outside, a few Apache women were already nearby, preparing food or tending to their morning chores. They glanced at her, but not in a cruel or judging way. Their expressions were calm, curious, and polite. One of them, the woman who had placed the shawl around her shoulders the night before, smiled and gestured for Margaret to come closer. Margaret hesitated, unsure if she was even allowed to be there, but the woman beckoned with a warm, patient expression. She offered Margaret a bowl of warm stew, simple vegetables, broth, and herbs. Margaret held the bowl carefully, surprised that someone had prepared food for her. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," even though she wasn't sure if the woman understood English. But the woman nodded kindly, as if the gratitude was clear enough. Margaret ate slowly, savoring each warm spoonful. She didn't realize how hungry she had been. Food at her father's home had been scarce, and when there was enough, she always served herself last, making sure he got the best portion. Here, she was given a full bowl without being asked to earn it or fight for it. As the morning grew brighter, more people in the camp began their daily activities. Children ran around laughing, elders sat together mending tools or speaking in calm voices, and the younger men were preparing for hunting or scouting. Margaret watched everything with careful eyes. She felt like a stranger standing in the middle of someone else's world. But instead of feeling unwelcome, she felt a strange sense of safety. Later in the morning, she was approached by an Apache elder named Nalin, a woman with long dark braids and kind eyes. She introduced herself slowly in broken English. She explained that Margaret did not have to fear anything in their camp. She also told her that they had learned why she had been brought there, and many of them were troubled by it. They could not understand why a father would treat his daughter in such a cold, uncaring way. Margaret lowered her eyes, embarrassed and hurt, but Nalin touched her shoulder softly and told her that she was safe here. Nalin then offered to show Margaret around the camp. Margaret agreed quietly, unsure what else to do. As she walked beside the elder, she saw how well organized the camp was. The shelters were placed carefully to protect everyone from wind and rain. The cooking areas were clean and the tools were neatly kept. People moved with purpose, but without rushing. There was a calm rhythm in their daily life that she found comforting. As they walked, Margaret noticed a tall figure standing near a group of men. He looked strong, with broad shoulders and a serious expression. He spoke with the others, his movements confident but calm. Nalin noticed Margaret's glance and told her that his name was Taza, one of the respected leaders of the camp. He wasn't the chief, but was someone who held influence because of his sense of fairness and calm judgment. Margaret didn't say anything, but she felt a strange sense of respect forming for someone she had never met. Later that day, Margaret tried to help with small tasks around the camp, but she moved slowly, unsure if she had the right to touch anything. When she reached for a bucket of water, one of the women gently guided her, not stopping her, but showing her the correct place where the water was usually poured and shared. Margaret was used to being scolded for doing things wrong, so this gentle guidance surprised her. Every time she made a small mistake, the women corrected her with patience, not anger. By afternoon, she found herself helping older women carry wood, gather herbs, and wash simple cloths. No one mocked her or called her names. The light, steady pace of work allowed her mind to settle. She found herself breathing easier, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like years. While she carried a bundle of herbs to the cooking area, she heard laughter behind her. At first, she froze, thinking someone was laughing at her. But when she turned, she saw that the laughter came from children playing a game with sticks and stones. None of them were paying attention to her. The sound of genuine joy filled the air, and she felt something warm inside her chest. This was the kind of laughter she had rarely heard back home. Her father never laughed. If he did, It was at the expense of someone else. Later in the evening, Margaret noticed Taza observing her from a distance. He wasn't staring harshly. His gaze was thoughtful. He seemed curious about the quiet girl the traders had brought. He had already heard from the elders what her father had said about her, and he couldn't understand how a man could treat his own child so poorly. He saw the way she moved carefully, how she avoided drawing attention to herself, how she waited before doing anything. It was the behavior of someone who had lived under constant criticism. When their eyes met, Margaret quickly looked away, her cheeks warming with shyness. She had never spoken to someone like him before, someone who held respect in a community, someone who looked at her without judgment or irritation. That night, she sat near one of the fires while the camp prepared food. She helped cut vegetables, passing them to the women who cooked. A little girl approached her with a small woven bracelet and offered it shyly. Margaret hesitated, placing her hand over her heart in surprise. The girl simply smiled and pushed the bracelet into her hand before running back to her friends. Margaret stared at the bracelet for a long time, her eyes soft with emotion. She had never been given anything before, not without conditions, not without someone expecting something in return. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared above them, the camp gathered for their evening meal. Margaret sat on the edge of the group, unsure if she was allowed to join. But Nalin noticed her hesitation and waved her over. Margaret sat down nervously, but the people beside her made room without complaint. She shared food with them, listened to their soft conversations, and watched how peacefully they interacted. She couldn't understand everything they said, but she understood the warmth behind their voices. She saw respect in the way they treated each other, cooperation in their movements, and kindness in their gestures. It felt like a world completely different from the one she came from. She thought of her father again. She wondered if he ever paused to think about her, where she was, if she was scared, if she needed help. But deep down, she knew the truth. He probably didn't care. He had already gained what he wanted, the horses. That thought should have made her angry, but instead it brought a strange sense of calm. She didn't owe him anything anymore. She had been sent away like an object, but here she was treated like a human being. Before she went to sleep, Taza approached her for the first time. He spoke gently, using the few English words he knew, telling her she was safe and welcome in their camp. Margaret nodded shyly, unsure how to speak in return. She managed to say, "Thank you," her voice small but sincere. Taza nodded with a calm expression and walked away. Margaret lay down that night feeling a mixture of emotions, sadness, confusion, relief, and a small spark of hope. She didn't know if she would stay forever or if she would leave someday. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't treated as a burden, she wasn't invisible, she wasn't mocked, she was simply accepted. And she didn't understand it fully yet, but her life in the Apache camp was only beginning. Something deep inside her was slowly waking up, a sense of self-worth she had never felt before, a belief that she might actually belong somewhere. What she didn't know was that the Apache were not just offering her shelter. They were watching her, learning who she really was. And soon they would show the world something no one expected. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret slowly adjusted to life in the Apache camp. What had begun as fear and uncertainty gently changed into something calmer. Something she could not describe fully but felt every morning when she woke up to the sound of soft voices and warm sunlight filtering through the shelter walls. She worked beside the women, learned the rhythms of the day, and slowly discovered that she was capable of more than she had ever been allowed to believe. People asked for her help with chores, trusted her with small tasks, and treated her with quiet respect. It felt strange at first, being valued, but she embraced it carefully, like someone afraid to break something precious. But as comfortable as she was beginning to feel, the world outside the camp had not forgotten about her. Traders came and went, sharing news between settlements and tribal lands. One afternoon, a group of traders arrived carrying supplies, and while they rested, they asked the Apache about the girl they had brought weeks before. They were relieved to see she was safe, but they carried news that unsettled the camp. Her father wanted her back. When Margaret heard this, she felt a rush of cold fear. She imagined returning to her father's ranch, imagined his anger, his disappointment, his unkind words, and the endless work without any appreciation. She remembered the heavy silence of that place, the lack of warmth, the loneliness that wrapped around her like a tight rope. The thought of going back made her stomach twist. She stood silently while the traders spoke to the Apache elders, her hands trembling. The Apache elders, however, were not silent. They listened to the traders' message and exchanged looks of disbelief and concern. They asked why Margaret's father wanted her back after sending her away so easily. The traders hesitated but eventually explained what they had heard in town. People were talking about how the Apache seemed to value her. Some said the Apache respected her gentle nature. Others whispered that she was being treated better among them than in her own home. When these rumors reached her father, he suddenly claimed he wanted her returned. Margaret lowered her head, feeling a familiar sting. Once again, she wasn't wanted for who she was, but for what people said about her. The traders left the decision to the Apache, insisting they were only messengers. When they departed later that day, the entire camp became unusually quiet. The elders gathered together, and Taza was called to join them for discussion. From where she stood near the cooking area, Margaret could see the circle of men and women speaking in low but intense voices. She couldn't understand the language fully, but she recognized concern in their gestures. She saw Taza glance toward her more than once, his expression firm and thoughtful. She felt small, powerless, unsure if she would be forced to leave the only place where she had ever been shown kindness. When the meeting ended, Taza approached her. He noticed the fear in her eyes before she could say a single word. He reassured her gently, speaking slowly so she could understand. He told her that no one in the camp believed she should be taken by force anywhere she didn't want to go. He said the Apache understood her father's decision had been cruel, and they did not trust a man who traded his own daughter for horses. He promised her that they would not give her back simply because someone from outside demanded it. Margaret felt tears rise in her eyes. Her whole life, decisions about her had always been made without her voice. Hearing someone say that what she wanted mattered almost broke her heart. Taza didn't touch her, but his calm presence alone was enough to steady her trembling hands. For several days, the camp waited to see if her father would come in person. Margaret worried constantly, imagining him arriving with anger or force. But instead, another group of traders came, bringing a more direct request. Thomas Hale wanted his daughter returned immediately. He claimed she had run away, that she had been taken against her will, and that he wanted justice. Taza's expression became colder as he listened. The Apache elders exchanged disapproving looks. They knew the truth, that she had not run, that she had been given away, and that she had accepted her new life only after facing deep grief. They were angered that her father twisted the story to make himself appear blameless. The traders insisted they weren't there to take Margaret by force, only to deliver the message. But their presence created tension in camp. People whispered that the settlers might accuse the Apache of wrongdoing if Margaret stayed. Others feared that returning her could encourage more cruelty toward her. The elders took a full day to decide. They discussed fairness, honor, safety, and truth. Everyone agreed that Margaret's father had acted without honor, and that forcing her to return would only cause further harm. Finally, the elders made their decision, one that would spread beyond the camp and shock everyone who heard it. When the sun began to set, the entire camp gathered. The elders stood together with Taza beside them. Margaret stood a short distance away, unsure if she even had the right to stand among them. Nalin gently placed a hand on her back and guided her closer, making it clear she was part of this moment. Taza stepped forward and spoke first. His voice was strong yet calm, filled with conviction. He said that Margaret was not property. She was not an object to be traded, taken, or claimed. No one, neither Apache nor settler, had the right to decide her future except Margaret herself. As he spoke, the camp fell silent, listening to every word. He explained that the Apache would not return her to a man who had given her away without care, without love, and without protection. He said the Apache believed in honor, and honor meant protecting those who were treated unjustly, not handing them back to cruelty. Then Taza turned to Margaret, his expression softening. He told her she was free, absolutely free. She could stay with the Apache if she wished. She could leave and travel with traders. She could try to build a life in another town or anywhere she desired. No one would hold her back. No one would force her. Her choice would be respected completely. Margaret felt her breath catch. She had never been given a choice before. She had never been asked what she wanted. She had never even imagined she could choose her own path. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked around at the faces of the people who had welcomed her, fed her, taught her, and protected her. She saw acceptance in their eyes, not pressure. They were ready to let her stay or let her go without anger or sadness. They simply wanted her to live freely. One of the traders who had witnessed the announcement shook his head in disbelief. He whispered to his companions that the camps and settlements would not believe such news, that the Apache had shown more humanity than many settlers ever had. He said people would speak about this for years. Margaret's voice trembled as she finally spoke. It was only a whisper at first, but everyone listened. She said she wished to stay. She didn't know how long. She didn't know what her future would be, but she knew she wasn't ready to leave the people who had treated her with dignity. She didn't say it loudly, but her words carried weight in the quiet evening air. Taza nodded as if he had expected her answer. Nalin smiled warmly. The rest of the camp murmured with approval, their faces gentle and welcoming. In that moment, Margaret felt something shift inside her, something like pride, something like belonging. That night, as the traders left to carry the news back to town, they knew they were carrying a story that would spread like wildfire. People would struggle to understand why the Apache had protected a girl they owed nothing to. Some would be angry, some would be shocked, some would begin to question their own beliefs. But Margaret didn't think about any of that. She sat near the fire, watching tiny sparks rise into the night sky, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. Her world had broken apart, but the Apache had helped her rebuild it, piece by piece, with kindness and honor. And although she didn't know it yet, her life was about to transform even more. The next morning after the elders' decision, Margaret woke with a sense of calm she had never experienced before. It wasn't the calm that came from silence or emptiness. It was the calm of feeling safe, of belonging somewhere, of knowing that her life was no longer controlled by someone who didn't care about her. She lay still for a moment, listening to the camp beginning another day. People spoke softly, fires crackled as breakfast was prepared, and the sweet smell of herbs drifted through the air. When she stepped outside, several women greeted her with warm nods. Children waved. Even those who didn't know much English smiled kindly at her. Margaret returned their smiles shyly, still unused to being welcomed rather than ignored or criticized. For the next few days, she continued her usual routine, helping prepare food, gathering water, sorting herbs, and assisting the elders. But something inside her had changed. She no longer moved like someone afraid of being yelled at. She no longer kept her eyes on the ground. She worked with quiet confidence, trusting that her efforts were appreciated. The Apache had given her room to breathe, and she was finally learning to fill that space with her true self. Taza watched her from a distance during those days, noticing the change in her posture, the ease in her movements, and the soft glow of hope that had settled in her eyes. He had seen many people enter their camp over the years, some lost, some frightened, some angry. But Margaret was different. She had arrived carrying years of hidden pain, yet she had responded to kindness more gently and openly than anyone expected. Her heart, once bruised by loneliness, was healing in the warmth of their community. One afternoon, while Margaret was helping Nalin sort drying herbs, Taza approached. His shadow fell beside them, and both women looked up. Nalin smiled knowingly and excused herself, leaving them alone. Margaret felt her cheeks warm slightly, though she didn't know why. She had grown comfortable around Taza, but being directly in his presence always made her feel a flutter in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was something new, something she couldn't name. Taza gestured for her to walk with him. She followed quietly, her steps slow and steady. He led her toward a small rise overlooking the camp. From there, they could see the circle of shelters. The children playing near the river's edge and the smoke rising peacefully from cooking fires. It was a breathtaking view, one Margaret never grew tired of. They stood in silence for a while before Taza spoke. His English was still limited, but his meaning was clear. He said she was free, but he also wished to know what she hoped for now. Not what her father wanted, not what the world expected, what she herself wanted. Margaret had no answer at first. No one had ever asked her a question like that. Her life had always been shaped by her father's demands or the tired routines of the ranch. She had never been asked her dreams, her hopes, or her desires. Finally, she said she just wanted a life where she wasn't unwanted, a life where she didn't have to fear someone's anger, a life where she could be useful, appreciated, and treated with basic kindness. As she spoke, her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. For once, she wasn't afraid to speak the truth of her heart. Taza listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he nodded slowly. He told her that she already had such a life here, if she chose to keep it. He didn't pressure her. He simply reminded her that the Apache respected her, valued her, and considered her a part of their community. The choice was hers. Margaret nodded, feeling emotions swell inside her. She knew her answer even before she said it. She wanted to stay. Word spread quietly through the camp, and the women smiled softly at her for the rest of the day. Children followed her around more confidently, treating her like someone who would not leave them. Nalin hugged her gently, as if she had known Margaret's decision before Margaret herself. The camp seemed brighter, warmer, as if they had been waiting for her to accept them fully. Weeks turned into months. Margaret grew stronger in every way. She learned more of the Apache language, enough to hold simple conversations. She learned how to prepare their traditional foods, how to recognize healing plants, how to sew small garments, and how to help elders with their aches and pains. She gained skills she never thought she would need, and yet each new lesson felt like discovering a part of herself she had lost long ago. The camp changed her, and she changed the camp in return. Her gentle nature made her a favorite among the children, who came to her when they were frightened, lonely, or simply wanted someone to listen. Her patience made her helpful to the elders, who appreciated her soft hands and quiet dedication. Even the younger women admired her strength not of muscles but of spirit. She had endured cruelty without becoming cruel herself. Taza continued to watch her, but not in silence anymore. He began to speak with her more often. They discussed simple things, weather, food, chores, but also heavier topics like family, belonging, and forgiveness. Margaret told him bits of her past, though she spared him the harshest details. Taza never asked for more than she could give. His calm presence helped her heal in ways she didn't fully understand. Her father never came for her. The traders who visited the camp sometimes brought news from the town. They said Thomas Hale had told people she had chosen to stay with the Apache. His pride couldn't handle the truth, so he created a story that saved his reputation. Margaret felt sadness and relief mixed together, but she no longer wished to return. The Apache had become the family she had never had. One crisp evening, as the sun set behind distant hills, the camp gathered for a feast. Hunters had returned with plenty of food, and the mood was light and joyful. People sang, laughed, and shared stories. Margaret helped serve food and then sat with the women, watching the firelight dance across the faces of those she cared for. She felt a deep warmth inside her, a peaceful certainty that she belonged right where she was. Taza approached her after the meal, and the camp grew a little quieter as people noticed. He stood before her and offered her a small carved pendant, shaped like a protective symbol of his people. It was simple, handmade, and full of meaning. Margaret held it gently, her heart pounding. She looked up at him, shy but steady. He didn't make a long speech. He simply said she was strong, brave, and kind. He said the camp respected her, and he said that if she wished, she could build her future among them, fully, openly, without fear. He didn't ask for anything in return. He only gave her a choice, just as the elders had done before. Margaret felt tears gather in her eyes. She held the pendant close, unable to speak at first, but after a moment she nodded. It wasn't a loud answer. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, gentle, and full of truth. She chose to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to. The camp around them murmured with soft joy, and several women wiped tears from their eyes. From that day on, Margaret was no longer seen as a frightened outsider or a girl cast away by her family. She became a respected member of the Apache community. She grew confident, learned new skills, built friendships, and created a life filled with meaning. She helped raise children, cared for elders, and worked beside Taza and others during hard seasons. She was no longer the plain, unwanted girl from her past. She was someone new, strong, valued, and loved in quiet but powerful ways. Years later, when settlers passed through the region, they saw a woman standing tall among the Apache, speaking their language and moving with a calm grace that came from inner peace. They were shocked to learn that she was the same girl whose father had traded her away. They couldn't understand how she had transformed so completely. But those who lived in the camp understood. They knew that kindness, respect, and belonging had reshaped her life. Margaret's story spread across towns and camps, whispered along trade routes and around fire circles. People told it as a reminder that humanity could appear in unexpected places, that sometimes the ones called wild showed more compassion than the so-called civilized, and that a person's worth was never determined by appearance or by someone else's cruel opinion. Margaret lived on with quiet strength, surrounded by people who valued her. She had found a home, a family, and a new identity. And although her past had once been filled with pain, she had rewritten her future with hope, dignity, and love. Her life became a lesson passed down through the years, a story of a girl unwanted by her own family, yet protected and cherished by strangers. A story that reminded everyone who heard it that kindness could change a life, and respect could heal even the deepest wounds.